I always knew that to live like a gentleman, one must have money.
Pengallen.
Half my friends living like paupers, and I'm living like a prince.
More alive than half the people here. Look at them.
Somewhere on the shore, a beacon is going out.
No one gets killed in the wreck! No one, you hear?
Welcome to 22nd episode of Foreign Correspondence Deeper into Hitchcock podcast. My name is Michał Oleszczyk and I'm joined as always by my co-host
Sebastian Smoliński. Hello.
It's a great pleasure to welcome you in our podcast in which we discuss every single movie in Alfred Hitchcock's filmography in chronological order. We are officially finishing the British period of Hitchcock's filmography with a film that has very few admirers, but it seems that it's actually a film that in the recent years probably gained more fan base than it had in the previous period. Today we'll be discussing Jamaica Inn, based on a novel by Daphne du Maurier and made in 1939, just before Hitchcock made an official move to the United States and Hollywood. And today we will be discussing Jamaica Inn with a wonderful writer, Dan Callahan, who is joining us from Brooklyn, New York. Hello, Dan.
Hello.
Very nice to have you on the show. Dan is an author, a critic, author of wonderful books. He actually authored a book on Hitchcock and on Hitchcock and his actors. The book title is The Camera Lies, Acting for Hitchcock, and he also wrote a number of books on acting in general, but also on specific actresses, one devoted to Vanessa Redgrave, one devoted to Barbara Stanwyck. We are very pleased and honored to have you on our show today.
Thank you for having me, you guys.
Okay.
I'm always happy to speak about Hitchcock.
It's a pleasure, and let's start by addressing the elephant in the room, as it were, the fact that this is a film, one of the very few films in the Hitchcock era that has a very strong and one would almost say bombastic performance at the very center, the performance by Charles Laughton, and the movie basically is a reworking of Daphne du Maurier's novel. Actually, it's quite a deep reworking of the plot. But first of all, let's ask you about your relationship with this film. Are you also as critical of it as most of the authors that are writing about it are? What's your story with watching Jamaica Inn over the years?
Well, I think for myself and also for a lot of people who are interested in Hitchcock, we first saw Jamaica Inn in very poor public domain prints. And then so that coupled with the fact that he himself dismissed it, it was often spoke of negatively. So I remember really, having a very negative reaction to it. But I think as with so many films, when they undergo a restoration and you suddenly can see the shadows, you can see the compositions. I think it's a fairly recent restoration that the Cohen organization did of the film. I think that has shifted the way that I have thought about it. And I also think that it's a Hitchcock film that, even though it wasn't his, and even though he didn't have anything to do with the original script, he tried to bring in his collaborators. But Charles Laughton had more power on this project than he did. Charles Laughton was a big star at that point. He had come back to England. He was controlling it because he and Eric Palmer were producing it. And they had produced several films before that, like St. Martin's Lane with Vivian Leigh, The Beachcomber with his wife, Elsa Lanchester. And so catering to Laughton was a big part of what was going on here. And it was a real tug of war. And I think the famous Hitchcock quote about it is, you can't direct a Laughton picture, you can only referee, and it was the case where Laughton was coming off of this string of performances. Like, this was his greatest period of inventiveness. And it was released in the same year he gave perhaps his greatest performance as Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And so set beside that performance, which is maybe the peak of his creativity, of his genius even. And I think that's a very extreme word to use, but I don't think it's a word it's a word you can use for Laughton. The character in Jamaica Inn, he doesn't have read on what he wants to do. It's like he's always trying out different things that might work. And I think the thing is, as I have continued watching the film, that has it's like this, he's playing this man who has no center. And you can say, if you want to be critical, well, the performance has no center. But I think you could also look at it as a way of he's playing this broken person who doesn't know what he's doing. You could also look at it like that. So as with many Hitchcock films, there are different ways that you can interpret it.
Yes, this is a great observation, and I was really thrilled when I was reading your part on Jamaica Inn in your book, your chapter, because you offer many great metaphors for this film and for this performance, two of which you already mentioned just now. So like this notion of being out of center, which is really interesting, and I think also you note the makeup, right, which kind of is, even we could say, the makeup is covering Charles Laughton, right? It's
when he turns, he has this very strange nose that he's put on. But the thing that's most terrifying are the eyebrows. He's stuck these caterpillar-like eyebrows on his forehead, and they're much higher than anyone's eyebrows ever are. And there's something about that that's so creepy. It's so, I mean, this character he's playing. It's these mixed signifiers. It's like there's these things that should seem absurd and almost comic, and yet the fact that they're comic is what makes us uneasy. And then there's the thing of when he sees the heroine, he falls in lust with her, really, and he starts quoting Byron, and he's very taken with her. And so there's a tug of war between him and between the heroine. And I think it should be mentioned that Maureen O'Hara, who's playing the heroine in Jamaica Inn, was very much Laughton's choice. She was very much Laughton's protege. He was very taken with her. And then she also played Esmeralda in The Hunchback of Notre Dame with him in Hollywood. And it's a fascinating Hitchcock movie in that the heroine is very active. And and that really has to do with Maureen O'Hara. Maureen O'Hara, everything about her is if there's anything bad going on, if she gets wind of it, you're going to be sorry, and so and she's a kind of voyeuristic heroine, as I talk about in my book. She's always seeing things and looking at things, and usually in Hitchcock films, that's the male perspective. We think of Rear Window, or we think of they're looking, whereas the female in Jamaica Inn is the one who is looking here. And that's one of many points of interest.
There is this great shot when she's peeping through the hole in the floor, or like the part of the attic. So yes, that's very interesting, because on the one hand, the Charles Laughton character is a master of events. He's pulling the strings, but on the other, he's as you're describing, he cannot find himself, and many of his associates or friends or servants consider him, deranged in a serious way. They comment upon it all the time, which I think is very interesting. I don't know if both of you would agree with this, but I had this hints, maybe it's a far-fetched analogy, but for me, this character, is in a way reminds me of Noah Cross from Chinatown. Of course, it's totally different, the metaphysical level, let's say, and the quality of filmmaking in many ways is much different. But there is something very uneasy in these scenes with Maureen O'Hara, which you also describe it in your book. You mentioned, I quoted that, you mentioned that these scenes towards the end, they have this extremely unpleasant quality, right? That he's trying to seduce her, or by force, right, to rape her in a way, which is very unsettling and points us towards Vertigo, for example. Because in one moment he's mentioning that he will buy clothes for her, right? He will dress her like Scotty in Vertigo. So I think that's something we can.
She's like a doll to him, and in a way that's like, it's another kind of maligned Hitchcock movie under Capricorn. Michael Wilding's dandy character, who's very much like the Laughton character in Jamaica Inn. The way that he looks at Ingrid Bergman in that movie is as a kind of project. It's like he wants to dress her. And see, the thing is, in Vertigo, that's very much this heterosexual male sexual, there's a fetish quality to it. Whereas under Capricorn, And to a certain extent in Jamaica Inn, until the end, it's almost as if there's a disconnection between sexuality. And it's like the man wants to dress her as if, I can picture Sir Humphrey maybe wanting to dress in female clothes himself, because he's a dandy and he tries anything out, and then of course he's obsessed with money and maintaining his own standard of living. And, he considers himself, someone who I know how to spend he says, I know how to spend money. So that's why I should have it. He thinks he's an aristocrat. And so really, when he looks at Maureen O'Hara's heroine, he wants to collect her, as a collector would, and of course, this is a man who's deranged. He even speaks about, there's insanity in the family and everything, and people are always talking about it. And Lord knows, he certainly seems like he could do anything at any time. And that is, a part of insanity. And Maureen O'Hara's character even says, he's mad. He doesn't know what he's doing, even though she's been put through hell. It's like she understands that she's dealing with someone who cannot control himself.
There's, I think, a deep perversity to the character, which also stems from the very troubled path that, this particular character took to even, arrive on the screen. Because in the original novel, the actual villain is the vicar, and by the very end of the novel, we learn that this priest is actually a false priest. He's pulling the strings. He is the godfather of this little small mafia that robs the ships that are wrecking on the Cornish coast, and apparently for a number of reasons, of which I think Laughton's vanity as a star was the chief one. It was reworked completely so that it's actually Sir Humphrey who pulls all the strings, and we are very aware of him pulling the strings from almost the very beginning. I mean, it's revealed, I think, in the 10th minute of the movie, and even before you can sort of figure it out that it's him. And what would you say about the very first image that we get of him? This sort of gobsmacking image of him eating, like with gusto, and inviting a horse into his dining room, and then the second he sees Maureen O'Hara, he starts to disrobe her. He's actually peeling off the clothes of her. This is one of the probably most deranged entries in Hitchcock's films.
Well, I think it certainly should be seen as a reference to Laughton's most famous performance of that time, The Private Life of Henry VIII, which he won the Academy Award for, which has that famous scene where he's eating and throwing so his image at that time, that was really something that was in people's minds. And so this portrait of him as this man eating and the horse and everything, it's almost, I think, as you probably know, he was going to play Claudius in I, Claudius for Joseph von Sternberg, which hadn't worked out. And so with Laughton, it's this thing, or he had played the Emperor Nero in The Sign of the Cross. So he was always playing these men who had power, and the power had gone to their heads, and they were doing just anything that came into their heads. And of course, Hitchcock is interested in that. It's the thing. Hitchcock, said that he was trying to take control of the project, and Laughton was always taking control of it in his own way. But I think you can feel Hitchcock, what his interests are. It permeates the film, even though he said that he wasn't as interested as, say, with some of the others. I think you can tell it's a Hitchcock film from beginning to end.
So maybe the horse also comes from this Roman emperor's tradition, right?
Yeah, the Caligula or Nero or Henry VIII or any of these men that Laughton had been playing. Grotesques, I mean, and then as you say in the novel, he's a vicar, and you only find out that he's pulling the strings later on. Now, see, that's interesting because Hitchcock always was speaking about the difference between suspense and surprise. And he always liked suspense better than surprise. And so you would think that revealing that Sir Humphrey is the man behind the shipwrecks 10 minutes in would be good. And instead of a surprise at the end, that it would generate some kind of suspense. But because of the way that the plot is structured, it doesn't really generate suspense. You just know it, and you don't think, oh, will Sir Humphrey be caught? Like, it isn't structured that way. And so he isn't able to really do anything with suspense, which he might have if the plot was structured in a different way. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Laughton had hired J.B. Priestley to beef up his own role, and so I think whatever you think of Jamaica Inn, it really can be felt that, this actor is being catered to. And in some ways, the film is being kind of pulled this way and that in order to satisfy his needs. And Hitchcock is being put in a kind of subordinate role, which was not a role he was ever accustomed to, ever, really. I can't think of another film, actually, where an actor subordinated Hitchcock. Perhaps Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which he made for his friend Carol Lombard, and which is one of my favorite Hitchcock movies. And I think it relates to Jamaica Inn in that even though Mr. and Mrs. Smith is not a film that he had any, the script had not been, the script was ready for him. He didn't have any, like he used to like to have his writers, to do things. Even though he wasn't involved in the development of it, the Hitchcock permeates every bit of that script, which is a very standard screwball comedy script. And of course, Hitchcock permeates Jamaica Inn, this Gothic melodrama, which was more his meat anyway, even though he didn't have the control he would have liked to.
So maybe just one last question about the acting, for the time at least. You also are the author of 2 books about the history of American acting. So maybe in this vein, because I had this idea that maybe there was something about the style of acting in the 1930s. Maybe you could corroborate or dismiss this claim that there was maybe bigger acceptance of these over-the-top, maybe a bit grotesque, or as we would say nowadays, campy performers. I think about Bela Lugosi, who was of course a very special case. But I think about Dracula and Charles Laughton from Jamaica Inn, and I think there are some similarities in this. The way this subverted masculinity appears on screen, the way they are, as you mentioned, grotesque and affectionate and dandy. Would you say that there was something specific to the period, or that's just 2 very separate cases?
I actually don't think so. I think as far as acting goes, an actor then or now can choose to go big, and it's a risk. And if they choose to go big, they need to be able to back it up. The worst thing in the world is when an actor then or now goes big and it just feels like surface, or it just feels like they've made a big choice, but they haven't backed it up. And you can tell that there's no life behind it. There's no soul behind it. Laughton was a great actor because, he really labored over his characterizations, and he compared them to a pregnancy, and he was much like the later method actors in that it wasn't even the way that they would, take apart a script. He thought of himself as an artist. And he would think to be inspired, he would listen to a piece of music, or he would go out and look at a landscape, or he'd look at paintings, and he'd say, "Now I have it." And directors like Garson Kanin and Hitchcock himself, they would mock this as, why does he need all of this? Why doesn't he just do it? But that was his way, and the results when he was at his greatest, bear out that whatever he needed to get to where he wanted to go. This is a great artist. If you look at him in Les Miserables in particular, I mean, he's tremendous in that, as this man who wants to be this kind of butch, and he's a wimp, but he wants to be this big masculine type guy, and it's an agony. And Laughton puts that whole agony onto the screen. He puts the whole thing up there so that with Laughton, you're dealing with the elemental. You're dealing with archetypes. You're not dealing so much with, here's a specific person in a specific situation. He's shooting for something much larger. He's shooting for, this person represents this huge concept. So that's why he needed to wrestle and do all these things, that might have worked out or might have not. And as I said, this is the year when he was giving maybe his greatest performance as Quasimodo. So there wasn't much maybe left over for Sir Humphrey and Jamaica Inn. And this also, after these two movies in 1939, in the 1940s, his work is not as pressurized. The great work is really finished for a while. His work after this movie and Hunchback of Notre Dame is much more casual. And Simon Callow writes about this in his Charles Laughton biography, which is a really great book about Laughton, but also about acting.
Well, I actually have two more questions about the acting in the film. I'm thinking of Maureen O'Hara, who for some reason didn't become associated as a great Hitchcock heroine, probably because of this film and how it wasn't very well received. But in some ways, I think she fits the bill perfectly. But on others, it's something went wrong. Do you think that Maureen O'Hara, for whom this performance, if I'm correct, this was the first performance in which she was actually billed as O'Hara. Her real name was Fitzsimmons. Do you think? Can you imagine sort of an alternative history in which Maureen O'Hara becomes a Hitchcock regular, or was there a mismatch here? And what would that mismatch be?
Absolute mismatch, and that's why it's so interesting. Maureen O'Hara is very simple. If you want to be a Hitchcock heroine or a Hitchcock hero, he's only interested in actors who they present a surface that says one thing, but underneath he might be the exact opposite. He's fascinated by contrast. With Maureen O'Hara, you don't get any contrast. She plays one thing strongly, and that's it. And there's nothing else. She's tough, and she's going to be, and it's very strong. It's like a very strong color. He's not interested in that. That's not, and which is why this was not his choice. It was Laughton's choice. So no, she's not really a Hitchcock type actor. And Laughton, in his own very different way, is not a Hitchcock type actor. Whereas what's fascinating is that Leslie Banks, who played the father in the first The Man Who Knew Too Much, is also in Jamaica Inn. And as I say in my book, if you didn't know it was the same actor, I wouldn't know that it was the father. Like he's so transformed. And so that does interest Hitchcock, someone who can transform to such an extent that you might not even know it's the same person. But he's not interested in this very strong, definite thing that Maureen O'Hara is doing. He's also interested in, one of the things that fascinates me most in Jamaica Inn is Emlyn Williams as the peddler, who, he's wearing an earring. It could be Alan Cumming, and then he gets the cop to smack him, and then he obviously enjoys being smacked. This is pure Hitchcock here, because he loves to put in these little perversities, So, that's another very interesting part of the film is Emlyn Williams. And Emlyn Williams was gay, and he was, best known as a playwright for having written Corn is Green and Night Must Fall. And he brings this very sexy, very modern feel. He's real non-binary. He's not male or female, and he's interested in the heroine. And it isn't the thing of, he's gay and he's maybe, he is, the character as he plays him is up for anything. Mm-hmm. And what's fascinating is, Sir Humphrey, the fact that he could do anything is menacing. Whereas Emlyn Williams, his character, the fact that he's up for anything sexually or up for anything, it's enticing. So that's a fascinating contrast. Like the Emlyn Williams character in the book is menacing and he's a jerk, and I think, as I remember, he humiliates this handicapped guy in the book. And so it's a completely different thing in the Hitchcock movie. In the Hitchcock movie, the character is sexy and he has a sense of possibility and it feels healthy. It doesn't feel menacing. Whereas Sir Humphrey couldn't be sicker.
Well, there's this one moment towards the beginning when we see, actually we don't see it because there's an off-screen killing during the raid on the shipwreck, and he comes back into the frame, and he sort of wipes his knife, of the blood, and it also has this sort of obscene. I think Hitchcock was in on the joke, of this sort of a bloody dripping knife that's being wiped on before our eyes, and I would say it's an incredible presence in the film, Evelyn Williams, because you mentioned this, that he's with the earring, and even with the very knowing smiles that he keeps sort of throwing right and left. It's almost as if he's in on the joke, that like this is not. Like there's something sexual here that cannot be even expressed in the language of British cinema at that period, but he's having fun with it, I would say.
Very much so. And I think we could go even further and say that Sir Humphrey, and especially like you were mentioning the end, when he's tying Maureen O'Hara up and all that, I think we should mention technically, part of what's so disturbing about that is the way it's shot. And all of Laughton's lines sound like they were dubbed at some other point. And it all feels very layered on in a way that's very creepy. So there's all of that. But then there's the Emlyn Williams character, who, even though he's a supporting character, it's almost like he's being set up as a contrast. And if we want to be very personal about it, I feel like Hitchcock probably does identify with Sir Humphrey as this figure who, is just not able to do anything that he would like to do. Whereas the Emlyn Williams character, I feel like Hitchcock himself would maybe like to be like the Emlyn Williams character. He knows that he's partly Sir Humphrey, but the fantasy is maybe I could be making a character like that and putting that character into the film. It's like he's offering you this alternative, this fantasy. And his greatness is in wanting a fantasy, wanting some utopian sort of thing. Mm-hmm. He's not someone who says, like, he's someone who, as an artist, is always looking for something better, And I think that in the Emlyn Williams character, he sees that, but he foregrounds, because he has to, the sickness of the Laughton villain.
Let's discuss the visuals just a bit, because as Michał mentioned, if we could create the canon of Hitchcock's most unloved movies, this one would be probably towards the top. But I'm very happy that we're discussing, the qualities of acting in such a detail, and we're discovering, thanks to you and your wonderful book, new dimensions of this film. And many people just dismiss the acting in this film as well. So I'm thinking about the simple fact that this movie is something new for Hitchcock on a few levels, and it's since we're doing this podcast to kind of present the whole narrative, I just wanted to note that. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's his first period movie set
Waltzes from Vienna.
Oh, that's right. But it's certainly his first approach to this Gothic style. And what do you think? How did he find himself in this movie? Is it just a warm-up before Rebecca? This sumptuous sets and this Gothic atmosphere, which is, I think, quite different than Expressionist Hitchcock. It's something else. How do you like it in this film?
I mean, really, this was the kind of melodrama that you saw on stage in his youth. And I think, I'd mentioned Under Capricorn before. I think it is similar to that, except, Under Capricorn is a little more simplified. I think this is the type of material that he is drawn to, melodrama and a woman in peril. But it's different in that, the heroine she's in peril, but you never really worry about Maureen O'Hara. I think, whereas Hitchcock does want you to worry about the woman in a lot of his other movies, I never worry about her. I worry about anybody who's around Maureen O'Hara. When she finds out what they're up to, she's going to, there's something so about her that you're not going to worry that she's in distress particularly. But as far as the material goes, he had one foot out the door. He was about to go to America to shoot Rebecca. And really, it was something that he just got himself into, and then he would prefer not to have. But I think it was interesting that he did this Daphne du Maurier material right before then going to have the great chance of Rebecca. And when he did Rebecca, he had to subordinate himself in some ways to David O. Selznick, and also to the original novel, because Rebecca, of course, is much more faithful to the original novel than Jamaica Inn is. Jamaica Inn was pulled this way and that, mainly because of Charles Laughton, and Daphne du Maurier herself was not happy with it.
I like what you are saying about Maureen O'Hara, and the way that we don't worry about her. It almost seems like the very thing that makes it impossible for her to be a good Hitchcock heroine. The very same thing made her into a perfect John Ford heroine. This sort of this force, I would say, forcefulness.
What do you think about, because I'm not sure, maybe I didn't get there yet in your book, but what do you think about Hitchcock as an actor? Because we could consider him an actor, especially in the 1950s when he was a real personality on screen.
It's very interesting. And towards the end, when I was writing my book, I thought I need to look at all the TV episodes again, and I need to consider him as a camera presence. And that was very telling, because I looked at all the intros and the outros of his show, and Hitchcock is a Hitchcock actor himself, in that he presents to the camera the face, the voice, the gubrious, and to an American, it's like he's the gentleman's gentleman. He's classy. He's going to tell you the secrets of the man of the house or the lady of the house.
Or the bathroom.
And there's something about him as a camera presence that he puts you on edge, because you don't know what you're getting. You don't know. He's not reassuring. Usually on television, the host needs to be reassuring. Hitchcock is not reassuring as a camera presence at all. So sometimes he'll speak very rapidly because that he needs to get in a certain amount of words before they go to the sponsor, or he'll slow the words down. He's playing you like a puppet. He's playing you like an audience. And you can also tell this thing of, he wants to idealize himself in a certain way. Hitchcock wanted to be Cary Grant, and he had a feeling that maybe because The Camera Lies, which is the title of my book, maybe if he shoots himself in a certain way, he can become Cary Grant. That's the hope. That's the romanticism of Hitchcock. And I think that he himself wanted to, he wanted to become this thing, this romantic image, because he himself knew that Cary Grant wasn't Cary Grant either. Cary Grant was this thing that he put together, his voice, everything, and it was part of the way he was shot and everything. So I think it's very revealing to watch him as an actor, as a camera presence on his show, because he himself is the type of actor that he wanted in his films, someone for whom you're never quite sure what you're dealing with. And that's part of being hopeful, and that's part of being romantic. I could be this, but maybe I could be that. And then that's part of the terror too, because I could seem like a nice person, but underneath I could actually be a killer. Mm-hmm. His killers often seem like very reasonable, nice, people, charming, and then the heroes can be very unlikable.
That's a fantastic set of observations, and thank you for that. And also, since we invite different Hitchcock scholars, so that's why I'm coming back to your book all the time, because I think it's a fantastic entry into Hitchcock scholarship and Hitchcock writing, actually, because it's also, I would say, a piece of literature. For example, the way you drift towards other issues, like for example at the end of the chapter about Jamaica Inn, you wonder about Barbara Stanwyck, who's one of your very favorites, and you clearly state that she couldn't be a good Hitchcock actress. So my question is, do you have your favorite quasi Hitchcock movie with Stanwyck? I'm thinking about Sorry, Wrong Number as this thriller where she was, a great presence. Do you think we could consider it as a kind of Hitchcock movie and maybe dream further about Hitchcock and Stanwyck?
No, because to me, Sorry Wrong Number, it's very simple. And she's playing this woman who, there's nothing to discover. Sorry Wrong Number started out as a radio play, which Agnes Moorehead did it on the radio annually practically. And 20 minutes on there, it is a perfect radio play. Whereas that movie, there's all these flashbacks and Anatole Litvak pads it out, and Stanwyck, Bette Davis, Katharine Hepburn, these very idiosyncratic and very definite people, they aren't Hitchcock people. It isn't, Bette Davis was on his TV show and it becomes a Bette Davis movie rather than a Hitchcock sort of thing, because you know what you're getting with her. She's always doing these big emotions and you can see exactly what's going on. Whereas he wants someone who, that's why quite often the best performances in Hitchcock movies are given by actors and actresses who were not thought of as great actors, or who were not thought of as, they were maybe people who were ingenues or male ingenue, like Robert Walker. Robert Walker in the 40s played these aw shucks soldiers. And then so to all those years of doing that, to then have this aw shucks cute sort of limited sort of guy reveal that he could be this psychopathic killer in Strangers on a Train, Hitchcock loved that sort of switch. And it's the whole thing of his about not being complacent. Evil has the power to assume a pleasing shape. Evil has the power to, I'm cute, I'm an aw shucks male ingenue. But, and then you're lulled, and then suddenly the knife is in your back, And so Hitchcock is very, very, his whole thing is about being alert, not being complacent, because if you're complacent, evil is going to hit you over the head before you know it.
Well, that's really fantastic, and I love. I have a feeling that we went way beyond Jamaica Inn, but it was a fantastic entry point to this world of Hitchcock as actor, director, and also as an actor, as it turns out, doing his own great performance and also sort of a magic act. Well, it was wonderful to have you as our guest. Real pleasure. So thank you so much again for fighting the time, and thank you for the book, which we are really admiring and still reading. Here's the the copy of it. So it was a real pleasure. Have a wonderful afternoon. See you around, and thank you again much for doing this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This was Dan Callahan speaking from Brooklyn, New York, and commenting on Jamaica Inn, but also on so much more. We do recommend Dan's book, The Camera Lies, Acting for Hitchcock, which is really fantastic, and also Dan's other books that we mentioned in this podcast, especially his Barbara Stanwyck one. Any other final thoughts on Jamaica Inn?
Maybe just let's state it that we're done with the British period. Of course, Hitchcock will be coming back to England to shoot a few other movies, but basically now this great journey starts, and I think we're both very excited because the next movie we'll be discussing is Rebecca, the movie which really almost everybody who likes classical Hollywood cinema enjoys and likes and have seen. So yes, I think it's a beautiful moment in our podcast history that we're departing slowly the British Isles, and now we are going to America.
Yes, and we will have another special guest for our next episode, which will be the Rebecca episode, but we will keep her identity secret for now. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Foreign Correspondence Deeper into Hitchcock. Please find us on Facebook, the fan page, Foreign Correspondence Deeper into Hitchcock, and spread the word. If you like this episode of our podcast, please make sure to share it in your social media, and we will meet you next time on the 23rd episode of Foreign Correspondence
Deeper into Hitchcock.